Hi everyone. I've had a lot of questions from people asking how I generate my Aztec masks and how I generate the Aztec patterns for my Starship models. So I wanted to make a video that demonstrates that process. We're going to be using Blender and then moving briefly into Substance Designer and then into Substance Painter and getting a clean Aztec pattern across the whole Starship. So I'm going to assume that you've finished all your modelling, everything's done. You haven't necessarily cut the windows yet, that can be done afterwards, but all the base shape modelling needs to be done. So we're in a place where we've got more or less a finished model. And we've also done a UV unwrap, so everything's been unwrapped. In the case of this model, it's been through a remesh, so everything is nice quads, and we're unwrapped across multiple UDIM tiles. Everything's nice and square. It doesn't have to be square like that, but it's the best way of getting the most out of your UDIM, out of your texture resolution. So it can be tempting to just project, unwrap the entire saucer, for example, across one UDIM. But if you think of it, a ellipse unwrapped across a square, you're going to get a lot of wasted space. And in this case, I needed a lot of texture resolution, so it's across UDIM tiles. But the point is, you've finished your modelling, you've got an unwrap, everything's ready to go. At that point, you want to make a duplicate of the model. Now, you can save that duplicate off as a new file, or you can just make it a new collection here in Blender, for example. But we want a full duplicate that we can work on because we're going to potentially ruin the geometry of that duplicate in the process of making these masks. So we're going to have our original model that we will place the finished textures on, and that will be the one that we use in the end. But for now, we want to work on a duplicate. And on this duplicate that we're free to sort of mess up and draw on and do things, we're going to draw our Aztec pattern. So we're going to make two materials, and I've got two here. I've got one called Aztec Blue and one called Aztec Green. And we're going to apply those to the model. And it's worth having your viewport display colour set corresponding. So in the case of the green one, it's green, and on the blue one, it's blue. And that way we can just use the material view here, and we haven't got to work in our cycles renderer. We can just see the colours here in the viewport, and that saves the fans on our computer going mad. So once we've got those two materials rolling, and we're working on a duplicate of the model, we're now going to draw the Aztec pattern on. So I've applied the Aztec Blue here as the base, and we're going to draw the green on. I'm using blue and green because on the TV show version of the Enterprise D, which is what we're working on here, the Aztecs were blue and green. So we'll go in, we've got blue as our base, and basically what we're going to do is just colour in the model with the pattern that we want. And this can be a long and tedious process, but it's all part of the fun. I'm not going to sit here and do the whole thing while you watch, obviously, but that's essentially what the Aztec pattern looks like on this model. It's that sort of thing, and you'd work around each panel. There's loads of reference available, and you're going to just draw the whole pattern in like that. You don't just have to colour in the existing geometry because we're working on a duplicate here and we're not going to use this version of the model in the end. You can draw on it as well. So if you need special shapes, so if you think in the case of the nacelles, there's a lot of interesting shapes on here. You might want to cut those in. You could use, for example, you can just make a mesh plane here, for example. You can make that into an interesting shape, like that, if you need to stamp interesting shapes on, and you can just knife project those on, as you would with a normal knife project. Knife project, assign green, and you can get all interesting shapes like that. Now you're going to have all new edges on there where you've done that, but that doesn't matter. Remember, this is a duplicate of the model, so we're free to draw on here as we like and do what we like with the geometry. So go around the whole model, draw on all the Aztecs using that process, and once you've finished that, if I get rid of those for now, so that goes back to white. Once you do that entire process, you'll end up with something that looks a bit like that. So you've gone round, you can see here, all these are drawn in. In the case of the nacelles, we've had to make more interesting shapes, cut those in, a lot of projection cutting, knife projection rather. There's a lot of new geometry on there, but that doesn't matter. We've got the colours and we've got the shapes set. So now what happens, we're going to need to export two FBXs. And the first one is our clean, sort of untouched model, if you like, which is the one that we're going to texture. So that's our original one before we drew all over it. So that's those. We're going to select those objects because we only want those ones. And we're going to do a file, export FBX, and we'll call that 1701D final. We only want the selected objects in this case, and we'll apply the modifiers. I don't think there's any on there, but we'll apply them anyway. Export FBX. And then what we need to do is we need to export another FBX. So we're going to get rid of those, and we're going to export our duplicate, the one that we have drawn all over, the one that's got all our patterns on. So file, export FBX, and we'll call that 1701D masks. Same again, only these objects, modifiers, etc. Now what we're going to do is move into Substance Designer to actually generate the masks that we're going to use. So into Substance Designer, File, New Substance Graph. None of this matters, we're not going to bother using any of this. We'll use a 4K texture resolution. Okay. And now we need to bring in one of those FBXs. So we're going to right click on our Substance Graph, or even the unsaved package, link 3D scene, and Blender. And we're going to bring in our masks one, the one that we drew all over. We'll let that load in. It's saying it's unwrapped across multiple UDIM tiles, UV tiles, because I've used UDIMs. Do you want to use it as UDIM mesh? Yes. And if we double click, we can see where it's coming here on the top left in our tree. If we double click on that, it will load it in the 3D view. Not that we need that, but it's just nice to know that it's working. There we go, and that's come in fine. Now, it doesn't know which materials to apply, so it's just showing grey, but they are on there. And we can prove that, and we're going to use those materials now. We're going to right click on the 3D mesh that we imported here, and we're going to do Bake Model Information. That's going to think for a second, and then we're going to get this new window. And here we go. We can see our two colours, Aztec Blue, Aztec Green. We can see our UV unwrap, and we can see that it's brought in everything that we drew. And what we want to do is, in our case, we're using 2, and we're just going to use it as a straight mask. So we want to change one of these to black and one of these to white, because we want to output a white and black mask. So that's the output that we'll see. That's how it will look when it comes out. We're going to make sure we're doing all of our UV tiles. We don't want to pick a specific one, we're going to do all of them. We'll use 4K, because why not? We're going to use low as high definition, and basically means we're just using this mesh. We're not bringing in a higher poly mesh. In some cases, if you were baking normal information or surface detail, you might have a higher poly mesh, but we're not doing any of that now. We're just baking out a straight color map. And where it says here Baker's Renders List, we're going to add a baker, and we're going to do color map from mesh. There we go, color map from mesh. It's worth anti-aliasing these a little bit, so double click. We might as well do a 2x2. And we'll make sure that they save out to somewhere where we can find them later. So we'll go Blender, Resources, no, we won't. Paint Masks Tutorial, make a new folder in there. There we go, and everything we can leave. So we're outputting black and white, use low as high definition, color map from mesh, make sure you're doing all the UV tiles, start render. And that will work through those. There you go. And that's baked out our masks. Once that's finished, we can close that, and we're done with Substance Designer at that point. You can do that process from Blender. Blender allows you to bake out masks as well. There's lots of tutorials online about how to do that. I prefer to use Substance Designer. You get a little bit more control. There's a few more options, and I just find the process a little bit less clunky than Blender. But it is possible to do it directly from Blender. So we're finished with Substance Designer now. We can get rid of that. So let's go into Substance Painter. So we've got we're going to create a new file in Substance Painter. 4K resolution again. Template, Blender. We're going to use the Blender template. Let's set that back to 4K. And the file that we're going to use is the 3D mesh, and we're going to use our 3D mesh that we didn't draw all over. So paint mask. We're going to use the final one, and this is the one that hasn't got all the rect geometry on it. This is just the clean one that we want to texture. That's all okay. We don't need auto unwrap. We're going to use UV tile workflow because we're using UDIMs in my case. We're going to preserve the UV tile layout. And if we do OK, that should load that in. There we go. So there we go. This has just got no material assigned to it, and it's just a flat model, if you like. So what we can now start doing is we can start texturing it. So let's give it a blue base. Let's get rid of this paint layer that's already there. We've created a new fill layer with this button here, and we're just going to change that to blue. And then on top, I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to make this one our green. And now obviously we're only going to want the green to show through in certain places, and that's what the masks that we've baked out are for. So I'm going to right click on this green and I'm going to add a black mask. Now this is the challenge with Substance Painter. A lot of beginners struggle with this bit, myself included. It took me a long time to get my head into the space where you're working with masks. So you're adding layers, and then everything you do you're masking those off and only revealing certain places. So in this case we've added a green layer, but then we've put a black mask across it, so that's hidden the whole layer. And any white areas that we add to that would be what would show through. So, next thing we need to do is we need to import the masks that we've baked out. So, File, Import Resources, Add Resources, and if we go into the Masks folder, we should see, there we go, these are the masks that we baked out. We'll find the first one, I don't think it matters, but 1007. I think if we just select them all actually, and it should combine these into one. So if I select all of them and say you are all going to be textures, I believe. There we go, it's combined them into one because it knows it's a UDIM, because they're named correctly with the UDIM numbers. It knows that it's a UDIM, it sets it as one object in there. And where we've added this black mask on here, we can bring this in, drop it on top of that black mask, and it puts it underneath. You can see now it's thinking, and because that mask, there we go, because that mask's got white areas on it, we're now only showing certain areas through. And now what we can do is tweak our colours to look a little bit more sensible. So the base colour was sort of a bluey green somewhere down there, I suppose. And then if we come into the green here, get something fairly close. I don't have the exact colours to hand, this is just a demonstration, but you get the idea now. You can change the colours, you can modify the roughness. So if we say for this blue here, we want this to affect the colour channel and the roughness channel. Now that roughness 0.3 is a bit low in my opinion, I'd sort of hover around about 0.5. Same for the green, affect the roughness channel. Get a similar value but make it ever so slightly different, just so when the light plays across the model you get that change. There you go, you can see now as the light moves across it's picking those out. Now that obviously looks very flat and very CG, not great. So the next thing we'd want to do is break this green up. If you think when the model was painted they probably would have painted the whole thing with a base blue, and then they would have made masks out of masking tape and painted the green on. It wouldn't be this clean and flat. So we're going to go back into this mask here, and we can see that we've got these, and we'll add a noise to break it up. So back over here, if we go to this textures, and let's do perhaps dirt, find one that looks interesting, grunge dirt scratchy, let's use that for the purpose of this. We can just drag that over, and you can see here we can put it on top of the masks. Now that's not working exactly how we want because it's just overriding the mask underneath, but if we change it from normal to multiply, there we go, now we're getting a better effect. We can see it's starting to look a little bit more like paint. Now that blue is perhaps, let's come up here somewhere and bring this green up as well. There we go. That looks better. Now obviously the blue underneath is as well far too clean. So my way of doing this is we'll have this, we've got our blue layer, we're going to duplicate that, duplicate layers, change the colour ever so slightly, so we'll move it perhaps darker, perhaps lighter. Let's go a bit darker on this one down here. Change the roughness as well, just so there's some variation brought in there. And then do the same again. So let's use another grunge dirt scratchy. Add it on there like that. And you can see now that's breaking up our blue as well. And because we're using the same mask twice here with two separate layers, what I would tend to do with one of them is just rotate it 90 degrees, because this grunge dirt gets applied in UV space, which is here. So we're just going to rotate it 90 degrees so that it doesn't line up perfectly with the one above it, because that's not how real paint would react. So for each one you want to randomize the rotation. There we go. And then it's just a case of playing around with the colours. You can add more layers, add more masks if you've got other things that you want to put on. There's a million Substance Painter tutorials out there. I'm not going to go into how that process works, but broadly that's the process from getting your masks out of Blender, through Substance Designer, and then into Painter for you to start using to texture your model. So if I now export those, File, Export Textures, it's just default material because we didn't apply a material in Blender. There was nothing applied, so it's just called it default. I don't think we have the ability to rename that. In our case, we are only using the colour and the roughness. It truncates these really annoyingly, and I can't work out how you can push them out. But we don't want the normal, we don't want the metallic map, we don't want the emission, we don't want the alpha, and I'm not sure what that one is. We don't want it anyway. We're using the Blender output template. If we go back to global settings, let's just make sure that we're going to send these out to somewhere sensible. Blender, Painter Masks tutorial, new folder, textures, spelled correctly. .4K, export. Right, those are finished exporting. We can dive back into Blender. This is our one that we drew all over. We don't want that. We're going to go back to the original model. We're going to make a new material. Call it Hull. Go to our shader editor. That's Control T. If you've got the Node Wrangler add-on installed, you can just click on the principled BSDF even, apologies. Press Control T and you get the texture stuff come up. Open, textures, and there we go, we've got our base colour and our roughness. You only need to click on one of them and it will bring in the whole set. For base colour, they will be sRGB colour space. So let's move to cycles. Let's just get cycles on so we can see. There we go. And then we want our roughness as well. Not metallic, roughness. Give that a second to load those in. And roughness maps are non-color data. Same with metallic is non-color, normal is non-color. It's just base color and emission normally that are color data. Let's apply that material to our nacelles as well. Hull. And there we go. It's brought those in. And that is the process for generating Aztec masks. Hope that was helpful to people. Sorry it was a bit off the cuff. I don't have a script. I don't do this sort of thing very often. But hopefully that's useful to you anyway. Thanks very much.